All right, what's going on, clinicians? Tony Maritato here, and welcome to this edition of Medicare Monday. So in this edition, I'm going to talk about one of the most common questions I think we get asked outside of credentialing, and that's what's the difference between being a participating provider with Medicare and being non-PAR. Clinicians, PTs, OTs, SLPs, we are not allowed to opt out of Medicare. Even if you've never been credentialed with Medicare, you are not opt out. You're not allowed to opt out. That doesn't mean that you're credentialed, but the idea is for those of you looking to get deeper into it, looking to understand the difference, opt out is separate, a completely separate topic from credentialing. So don't get those confused. Now let's get into the topic of credentialing with Medicare. You have two options for credentialing. You can be PAR or non-PAR. There's benefits, there's pros and cons to both. At the end of this video, I'm going to talk to you about what I think is the best kind of position to put yourself in to help your patient, that Medicare beneficiary. But let's go through how Medicare explains the difference between PAR and non-PAR. Jump into my screen and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we go. If we're looking at participating provider status versus a non-participating provider status, a provider basically agrees to accept Medicare approved amount as payment in full. Now let me explain that because I think that needs a little bit of clarity. Medicare has an established allowed amount, a physician fee schedule. Each CPT code you're going to bill for has an accepted allowable amount that you would get paid. When you say that you're accepting payment in full, basically what you're saying is you're going to accept Medicare's 80% of the allowed amount, and then either a secondary insurance plan, which could be a Medigap supplemental policy or a completely unrelated to Medicare policy, will kick in as a secondary, or the patient personally will be responsible for the remaining 20%. But when you look at the physician fee schedule, you look at the allowed amount, that is the maximum. That would be payment in full that the participating provider would be allowed to accept. As a participating provider, you may not collect more than the applicable deductible coinsurance for covered services. You may, however, collect payment for non-covered services. And we've talked about this in other videos. This would be things like dry needling, kinesio tape. This would also include things that were not medically necessary. So keep that in mind. Just because a procedure might be normally a covered service, medical necessity comes into play here. So if it's not medical necessity, it's not a covered service, you then can collect your cash rate. Now, charges are not subject to the limiting charge. Once again, I think that's a little bit confusing the way they put that in there. So as a participating provider, charges are not subject to the limiting charge. The thing is, the allowed amount is less than the limiting charge. You cannot charge the limiting charge. You go by the allowed amount. Medicare payment is paid directly to the provider. Mandatory claim submission applies. Now, this is really important because a lot of providers that I speak to who have not yet credentialed have this misconception that as a non-PAR provider, they have more liberties than as a PAR provider. I'm just going to jump over real quick because this is just such an important fact. As a non-PAR provider, mandatory claim submission also applies. This is not something you get out of. You basically have the same responsibilities whether you're PAR or non-PAR. So just keep that in mind. Okay, placement in the Med-PARD, Medicare Participating Physician Supplier Directory, no big deal. Reimbursement is 5% higher than the non-participating amount. Again, this is another one of those little kind of weird things that people don't fully understand. So as a non-PAR, and we'll see this, you're getting paid 5% less than the allowed amount, but you're allowed to charge the patient higher than the allowed amount. Whereas in a participating provider agreement, you will be paid 5% more than if you're non-PAR, but you are not allowed to charge more than the allowed amount established by Medicare. This one I think is huge. And if for nothing else, I think this is where the decision to become PAR is so important. Medigap information is transferred. Whereas when you look at non-PAR, Medigap information is not transferred. So this gets into a whole bunch of extra administrative work, and I'm going to kind of explain other components of the administrative cost that I think far exceed the little bit of extra percentage you're allowed to charge as a non-PAR provider. So non-PAR has not entered into an agreement to accept assignment. You may accept assignment here. You can elect to accept assignment or not on a claim by claim basis, but you don't automatically accept assignment. Accept assignment essentially gives payment directly to you instead of going to the patient. And I'll do a whole video on accept assignment just so I can kind of clarify that a little bit better based on established Medicare guidelines. If the provider performs elective surgery costing more than $500, not in our wheelhouse, cannot bill the patient more than the limiting charge on non-assigned claims. Okay, I'm going to say that again. You cannot bill the patient more than the limiting charge. And when you look up the physician fee schedule, you'll see the allowed amount and you'll see the limiting charge on non-assigned claims. Now they have states here because I'm actually on Navitas Solutions website. So then they're talking about Pennsylvania. Providers cannot bill the patient more than the Medicare approved amount on non-assigned claims. Beneficiary receives payment on non-assigned claims, and that's what I was talking about earlier. So when you're PAR, you accept assignment, payment comes to you. When you're non-PAR, you may accept assignment and payment will come to you, or you may not accept assignment and payment will go to the patient. You decide kind of, and this goes back to you as the business owner. You have some freedom, some liberty here to kind of decide what kind of experience you want to provide your patients. Mandatory claim submission. You still have to submit the claims electronically in most cases. So you don't get out of, having a clearinghouse, having a patient accounting software that can generate the electronic claim, submit the claim, post payments. Clinical lab doesn't apply. Approved amount is 5% less than for participating providers, even if assignment is accepted on the claim. Medigap information does not transfer. Now, so that's the basic summary, right? And you can find more information online through Medicare approved websites, but I want to get into the nitty gritty of what we think is really going on. And that is, Medicare beneficiaries conventionally, traditionally are 65 and older. This is a population that unfortunately, at least within the U.S. society, has been put on high alert, right? Their guard is always up. They're always fearful that somebody is trying to scam them, call them, get their social security number, take all the money out of their bank accounts, and rightfully so. They are being targeted, and I don't blame them. And if you look at the literature on Medicare.gov, the consumer-facing website, I think you see, they are very pro in-network participating provider. Okay, so they kind of put that fear into the beneficiary ahead of time. And now you, as the provider, when the patient says, well, do you accept Medicare? Well, yeah, you accept Medicare. Are you participating provider with Medicare? If you choose to be non-PAR, obviously you have to say, no, I'm not participating with Medicare. That immediately puts up that red flag to say, hey, what's going on? Am I going to get billed? Am I going to have to pay more than I'm expecting? Do I not have the safety and the protection of the Medicare network? And so I think that not only are you in a position where now you have to collect money over the counter for the added percentage you're charging, the patient's gonna get receive statements saying that you're a non-PAR provider, which is a little bit suspicious. But you also have to overcome that distrust that automatically gets placed in the beneficiary's mind. Now, from my perspective, I think the biggest issue is the cost of collecting the over-the-counter payments that you wouldn't have to deal with in most cases as a participating provider. Yes, you may be stuck collecting a deductible. Yes, you may be stuck collecting a coinsurance if there isn't a Medigap plan or a secondary policy that's going to cover it. But by and large, the secondaries, the Medigap, the supplemental plans, they're going to cover all of what Medicare does not cover. So I would say, I don't have an exact number, but probably less than 5% of our Medicare population at my clinic actually has an out-of-pocket over-the-counter cost that we have to collect on. And so just the savings and administrative time, hassle, headache, trying to track down the patient, trying to get this extra payment from the patient, on top of the distrust of not being a participating provider, to me, totally makes it worth it to be a PAR provider. Now, there is an open enrollment period at the end of the year where if you choose to be non-PAR when you first credential, you can switch. I think it's November, December. Don't quote me on it. I'll find the exact guideline. But that being said, you still have to submit claims whether you're PAR or non-PAR. You still have all the supervisory, regulatory compliance burdens that you have being PAR or non-PAR. I just don't see the benefit within that little bit of percentage you might be able to charge more, especially if you run into a situation where patients are self-discharging prematurely. You have to chase them down to collect that little bit of money over the counter that they owe you. You have to start mailing out invoices, sending refunds if you process and collect ahead of time incorrectly. There's just so much extra work in it. So guys, here's the resource. Look it up, review it for yourself, make that decision before you start the credentialing process, because you're going to want to know, are you going to choose to be PAR or non-PAR? CMS 460 is the form to elect to become a participating provider with Medicare. You do it when you're submitting your 855I through PICOS, or if you're credentialing your company. Guys, let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what other questions this is bringing up for you, because I think it's important. These conversations are not being had enough. And while I'm not the expert, I'm bringing you the resources and pointing you in the right direction. Guys, I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks so much for your time.